Tonight, families left with unanswered questions after one of Canada's most notorious serial killers dies.
To be honest, I jumped up and down.
Relief for some victims' families, but no closure for others after Robert Pickton is fatally attacked in prison. Donald Trump lashes out.
If they can do this to me, they can do this to anyone. These are bad people.
The fury and the falsehoods as he tries to turn an unprecedented conviction into a campaign opportunity. Plus, we break down the potential sentence. Could Trump really do jail time? Why so many great white sharks are prowling off Canada's east coast.
I don't think it's scaring people. I think it's just being shark smart.
The people getting up close with the apex predator.
From CBC News, this is The National with Ian Hannamansing.
One of the most notorious serial killers in Canadian history is dead. Prison officials confirm Robert Pickton has succumbed to injuries from a brutal attack by another inmate earlier this month. Pickton was convicted in 2007 of killing 6 women on his BC pig farm. But the horror of his crimes went much wider. Remains or DNA from 33 women were found on his property. He bragged about killing even more. Many of his victims were Indigenous from Vancouver's downtown east side. For the families of the women brutalized and killed, Pickton's death marks the end of a traumatic chapter, even as questions about the extent of his crimes remain. Lindsay Duncombe now with their reaction and the changes that stemmed from his conviction.
This is what's left of Robert Pickton's notorious pig farm. Remnants of the pain he caused, tributes to the women he killed. The serial killer was attacked by another inmate in prison earlier this month. The Vancouver Sun reports Pickton was stabbed in the head with a broken broom handle. For some victims' families, there is now closure, even joy.
A relief and just happy. To be honest, I jumped up and down.
Tammy Lynn Pappin's sister Georgina's DNA was found on Pickton's pig farm, along with the remains or DNA of 32 other women.
It was only her left hand, the bones of her left hand.
In 2007, Pickton was convicted of 6 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Official justice likely for only some of his victims. He had bragged to an undercover police officer he had killed 49 women.
Those families are reliving that now, and they're the ones who should be remembered, not the serial killer who committed those crimes.
Justice took too long. The conviction came a full decade after reports sex workers, many Indigenous, were disappearing from Vancouver's downtown east side. Investigations were botched. A commission later blamed systemic bias and fragmented policing.
Obviously, his legacy is one of horrible notoriety and the innocent suffering, the devastation that he caused so many innocent people.
Pickton's brutality and the failure to stop it sooner forced Canadians to reflect on how our institutions treat the vulnerable, especially Indigenous women, a reckoning still unfolding.
Now, if any vulnerable person goes missing, the police have an obligation, a legal obligation, to do an investigation and to report back to the families.
Police and prison officials are investigating the attack on Pickton, a brutal end for a man with a brutal legacy. Lindsay Duncombe, CBC News, Vancouver.
Former president and now convicted felon Donald Trump is fighting back. The day after the guilty verdicts in his first criminal trial, he gave a long speech denying wrongdoing, attacking the system, and rallying supporters. Chris Reyes has the scene at Trump Tower and the response.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Fresh off his conviction and back on his own turf, Donald Trump launched into his own version of what happened.
If they can do this to me, they can do this to anyone. These are bad people.
The rambling speech lasted more than half an hour, jumping around from grievances against a criminal trial to a smattering of election issues. But the core message was clear. His political rival was to blame.
Just so you understand, this is all done by Biden and his people.
Trump has never substantiated those attacks, and the criminal trial in New York was brought by the Manhattan District Attorney, an office independent of the White House.
They will appeal. There are some issues that are worthy of consideration on appeal, but in the trial, as it was set out pre-trial with all the rules, they were convicted, and that's what they have to respect.
Also standing up for the rule of law, President Biden, who has never commented on the case until now.
That's how the American system of justice works. And it's reckless, it's dangerous, it's irresponsible for anyone to say this was rigged just because they don't like the verdict.
Free Trump! Free Trump!
Outside Trump Tower, a snapshot of the court of public opinion, where conclusions are much more varied than the now historic unanimous guilty verdict. Trump, who's now casting himself as a victim and a martyr, clearly more concerned about winning sympathy and votes.
I'm honored to be involved in it because somebody has to do it, and I might as well keep going and be the one. But I'm very honored to be involved because we're fighting for our Constitution.
While Trump focuses on his campaign, his legal team have their marching orders appeal all 34 convictions.
President Trump has put faith in me and my team, and there's a lot of great people that I work with.
So, Chris, Trump may have faced legal defeat here, but of course he's claiming a victory for his campaign.
Yeah, I mean, this has rallied his base without a doubt, Ian, and not just big-time Republicans, but regular voters. The Trump campaign is claiming they raised $34 million in a matter of hours following that verdict. Today, Trump pointed his supporters to his website asking for more money. He's likely going to take that message on the road with him to some scheduled fundraising events in the weeks ahead. And his big sell, really, is this conviction.
Chris Reyes in New York City. The fallout from that conviction is far from over. I'll be talking to a former assistant DA from Manhattan and a former U.S. federal judge about whether Trump is likely to do jail time. That's coming in the breakdown. After U.S. President Joe Biden's comments on Trump's conviction, he championed a new proposal to try to end the war in the Middle East. He says Israel's three-phase plan includes a total ceasefire, the return of all hostages, and rebuilding Gaza. Sasha Petrusik takes us through it.
The speech was one of Washington's strongest public pleas for peace in almost 8 months of war.
I ask you to take a step back and think what will happen if this moment is lost.
Calling it Israel's latest offer, Joe Biden laid out a roadmap to a permanent ceasefire, for the first time offering Hamas something it's been demanding.
Hamas needs to take the deal.
The only way, says Biden, for Palestinians to get Israel out of Rafah, to stop an offensive that's killed hundreds of civilians, says Gaza's health ministry. 300 militants, says Israel.
Some of them were hiding underground. Our troops fought them bravely in, quote, close quarters combat.
To speed up aid delivery that's been restricted by blocked borders.
Distribution within Gaza is not working effectively.
The offer described by Biden would start with a 6-week withdrawal of Israeli forces from most of Gaza, a release of Israeli hostages by Hamas and Palestinian prisoners by Israel. The ceasefire would continue as long as both sides kept their end of the deal, stretching to a permanent peace, says Biden.
I think it's the most significant progress.
With the U.S. president behind it, observers say this deal may have a chance. Maybe.
There are some major issues to be overcome. One, I'm hearing from Israeli media sources that Netanyahu was surprised by the president's speech.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has not officially confirmed the details of this offer, one Biden says is the only way for Israel to avoid an indefinite war.
That will not bring hostages home. That will not bring an enduring defeat of Hamas. That will not bring Israel lasting security.
Online statements from Hamas say the deal is worth discussing. Sasha Petrusik, CBC News, Toronto.
Toronto police are citing the war as a major factor in an alarming spike of reported hate crimes, up 47% last year, over a third targeting Jewish people. And as Thomas Dagla shows us, there's been a string of anti-Semitic attacks in major Canadian cities, one at a Vancouver synagogue just last night.
Call the rabbi.
Community members rushed to put out the flames and call fire crews to this Vancouver synagogue. Jewish leaders say at about 9:30 Thursday night, someone poured fuel and set a fire in the front doorway. No one was hurt, but the rabbi says the attacker must have known that would be the time worshipers would be leaving.
It seems very brazen for someone to attempt this, and it obviously makes us feel very vulnerable.
It's the latest in a string of similar attacks in Canada's biggest cities, with Montreal police called Wednesday night to a Jewish school hit by gunfire, just days after the community rallied outside a Toronto Jewish girls' school, also struck by bullets, with suspects seen fleeing in an SUV.
And we should all be concerned not just at the attacks that have taken place, but about what's likely to come next.
At a public meeting, Toronto police laid out new figures showing reported hate crimes reaching a 10-year high. Antisemitic acts alone doubled in 2023, coinciding with the October 7th attack in Israel.
What concerns me the most is also the clear fact that there's underreporting in some types of hate crime.
Muslims also accounted for one of the most commonly targeted groups, with this suspect caught on video throwing rocks at a Toronto area mosque.
There's over 2/3 of hate crimes that happen that the police probably aren't aware about.
The Prime Minister said on social media, "This is not the Canada we want to be," while this Liberal MP rose in the House of Commons.
Enough is enough. Canadian Jews have a right to be safe in our country.
Both here in Toronto and in Vancouver in recent days, police have said they're stepping up patrols near Jewish institutions. Thomas Daigle, CBC News, Toronto.
And as police investigate the alarming rise in hate crimes, our Ioana Remiliotis got a first-hand look at how one Toronto police unit does that work.
This is the second time in a month the synagogue has been targeted.
What went through your mind when you saw that?
Well, shock, total shock, right? Dismay, upset, emotional.
We got exclusive access with Toronto Police's hate crimes unit as they try to keep up with a relentless number of calls.
We'll have that story in the days ahead on The National. 2 young children and 2 adults are in critical condition tonight after a fiery 3-vehicle crash in Ottawa's West End. Police say it happened during rush hour on Highway 417. One car catching fire, that driver pulled out. Officers tell us a 3-year-old boy was airlifted to a trauma center. A 3-year-old girl and 2 adults were also sent to hospital. Car crashes are a source of psychological trauma for many. That's according to a new survey from Statistics Canada. It found nearly 2/3 of Canadian adults have been exposed to a traumatic event. As Christine Barak shows us, people don't always recognize it right away.
We all experience stress, but some moments stay with people.
Lots and lots of rumination where, you just can't shut the brain off. You're thinking about something over and over and over.
A new Stats Canada survey found nearly 2/3 of adults say they've directly or indirectly been exposed to a traumatic event, mainly unwanted sexual experiences and natural disasters. A life-threatening illness, physical assaults rank high, but vehicle crashes top the list.
And the thing that really stuck with me with that one was her eyes. Her eyes were open, and I'm looking into her eyes as I'm trying to ventilate her.
Rob Lethan was a firefighter for 30 years. He says the accumulation of multiple traumatic events eventually led him to get help, but not before he tried to take his own life.
We now know that emotional trauma, psychological trauma, is actually toxic to the hardware, to the brain.
Doctors say, like Lethan, about 6 to 10% of adults experience symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, which leads to higher rates of unemployment, heavy drinking, and cannabis use. This psychiatrist says the earlier someone recognizes trauma, the better.
Get help, talk to somebody, get documented, find out what the resources are.
Sometimes I can't even close the door because they are feeling so panicked.
This occupational therapist works with people traumatized after car crashes.
We have to identify the negative thoughts. We have to challenge those thoughts with proof and evidence. And then we have to replace those thoughts with more objective and realistic ways of thinking.
For Lethan, mental health supports made the difference between life and death.
Yeah, I still do get triggered from things, but I've got the toolbox, the mental toolbox now of able to deal with it.
So, Christine, we heard the psychiatrist there talking about how important it is for people to get help, but that's not always straightforward.
No, it isn't. Counseling isn't covered. Therapy can be expensive, and wait lists for a psychiatrist or psychologist are incredibly long. Dr. Steiderman said governments need to take mental health more seriously. Dealing with a trauma quickly can prevent a cascade of other health issues. There are some resources online, but at the very least, everyone we spoke with said, if you've been through something that you have found truly unsettling, tell someone you trust. Don't just bury it.
Christine Birak in our Toronto newsroom. Washington has lifted a restriction on the use of U.S. weapons by Ukraine, allowing Kyiv to strike Russian territory with them for the first time. It's a move Ukraine says is desperately needed. Its second largest city, Kharkiv, is vulnerable, just 30 kilometers from the border with Russia and increasingly under fire, sometimes with devastating results. But as Briar Stewart explains, the prospect of U.S.-made weapons hitting targets in Russia carries risks, and Washington still has limits.
The agony of a husband calling out for his wife and their daughter. They all lived on what was the third floor of this building in Kharkiv that was struck overnight by 2 missiles. He hasn't been able to reach his family since. His daughter and wife are in there, said this man. I'm in shock. This is the latest deadly attack on the Kharkiv region, which is why Ukraine says it needs to be able to use Western-supplied weapons to target military sites inside Russia before it launches more strikes. Now the U.S. is shifting its policy.
That went right to the president, and as you've heard, he's approved the use of our weapons for that purpose.
Germany granted similar approval, and like the U.S., its policy is limited. Ukraine is allowed to use Western-supplied weapons to try and stop attacks on Kharkiv, but it can't use them to launch long-range strikes deeper into Russia. At least not for now, says Ukraine's president.
I think that using any weapon, Western kind of weapon, on the territory of Russia, it's the question of time.
When asked about the use of Western weapons, the Kremlin said that NATO members have been entering a new round of escalation and tensions, and they're doing it deliberately. This military expert says NATO members remain concerned about Western weapons accidentally causing civilian casualties in Russia, which is why some will continue to tread cautiously.
Giving Ukraine a free hand in Russia carries with it risks. But of course, Russia, from the outset of the war, has had a free hand in what it's done in Ukraine.
And what it continues to do. At least 5 were killed in the strikes overnight. Briar Stewart, CBC News, London.
South Africa looks set for a coalition government as the ruling ANC party sees its worst election results in 30 years.
People want to see change. Civil society is tired of this lethargic way of how these so-called political parties have governed.
The ANC is leading overall as the vote count continues, but a new opposition party, headed by former President Jacob Zuma, has eaten into their support. The ANC has governed South Africa since Nelson Mandela led them to victory after the fall of apartheid in 1994. But chronic economic and social problems have left many frustrated with the status quo. Ontario golf courses are asking for help to stop thieves from taking off with their golf carts.
Well, you have that violation feeling, and then you have that anger or sadness.
How they're vanishing off the course.
And the Canadian Screen Award goes to Blackberry.
But why aren't Canadian films winning at the box office?
There's really no way to sugarcoat it. It's really, really tough.
And a rare bug pulls up in one family's driveway.
Is there such a thing as a pink grasshopper?
We're back in 2. A storm sent window washers in Beijing on a wild ride Thursday. Hail and strong winds hit as they worked outside Chinese Central Television headquarters, sending them thrashing around on their cables at the 51-story building. Falling trees and power lines also causing problems around the city. As Canada grapples with an auto theft epidemic, it turns out cars and SUVs aren't the only vehicles disappearing. Ontario golf courses are reporting a huge spike in stolen golf carts. Here's Lisa Shing on what could be a professional operation.
They came in the middle of the night, and they had a plan.
Looked like one person would put the cart in neutral and push it out, and then the other one would get the other cart started.
Once the thieves slowly got 11 of these carts to the road, they loaded them onto a trailer hooked up to a pickup truck and disappeared.
Well, you said that violation feeling, and then you have that anger or sadness.
Since 2021, about 200 carts have been stolen from at least 17 Ontario golf courses, 10, sometimes 12 at a time. In one case, they took 45, leading some to believe this is the work of professionals.
To move one golf cart, some guy can do that with a pickup truck. To move 6 golf carts, you need a flatbed. You need to be, working as a team.
During the pandemic, supply chain issues meant a shortage of stock, so prices of these carts shot up, doubled in fact, in both the new and used market. This in turn has fueled a thriving secondary market, according to at least one distributor.
We've never seen anything like this.
8 of Rob Davis's carts were stolen from this warehouse in March.
Trailer parks, cottages, farmers, everybody that needs a utility type vehicle, is a buyer for used golf cars.
Davis and some golf course owners say they've scoured online sites like Kijiji for them. So far, nothing has turned up. With so many thefts in so many different locations, they're calling on police to find out if they're linked.
I'm hoping that the police services are communicating with each other.
The Ontario Provincial Police says it's investigating the theft at Settlers Ghost Golf Course, but would not confirm whether the others are connected. They also do not answer the other big question in the golf community. Where exactly are these carts going? Lisa Shing, CBC News, Toronto.
A predator is making its way to the coast of Nova Scotia.
Like a beautiful monster.
Great white sharks are migrating further north, and some tourists want a chance to see them.
They're coming so close right now!
But first, Donald Trump reacts to a guilty verdict.
We'll keep fighting, we'll fight till the end, and we'll win.
But can he avoid a jail sentence? I speak with legal experts to find out. The National breaks down the story shaping our world. Next.
Is this real life? Too good to be true.
Jennifer Lopez has canceled her summer tour, including 3 Canadian shows. She made the announcement today, saying she's heartsick but needs to spend more time with family. The This Is Me live tour was supposed to start later this month. Refunds will be issued to ticket holders. The movie Blackberry cleaned up at the Canadian Screen Awards in Toronto. It follows the rise and fall of the world's first smartphone, an iconic Canadian invention.
And the Canadian Screen Award goes to Matt Johnson, Matthew Miller, Blackberry.
Blackberry took home a record 14 awards, including for Best Supporting Comedy Performer, which went to American actor Glenn Howerton. Director Matt Johnson accepted the award on Howerton's behalf, poking fun at the actor's absence.
Glenn was at every single award show we got invited to, and I was with him. We're talking like dozens and dozens, small cities, but all in the States. And I think that really tells us something about our industry, doesn't it?
Johnson clarified he was joking, but he made a point that many others in the industry have echoed. The Canadian film industry is in crisis. As Eli Glasner shows us, behind the scenes at these award shows are filmmakers struggling to tell their stories.
We'll probably need to go scout it today.
Yeah.
Albert Shin might look like he's living the Canadian filmmaker's dream, but
there's really no way to sugarcoat it. It's really, really tough.
He's directed 2 acclaimed films, but after the Hollywood strikes and now in a contracting marketplace, it's a struggle.
The rug is being pulled underneath your feet all the time in terms of the amount of films that are being made, or the platforms where your films can exist or where you can make money.
In 2023, only 3% of the Canadian box office were Canadian films. Take out smash hits like Paw Patrol and Blackberry, and the sliver gets even smaller.
Movies are my entire life. I need to watch movies like I need to breathe air.
I Like Movies was in the top 10 Canadian films last year. The love letter to film geeks toured festivals and earned 100% on Rotten Tomatoes.
We made back our budget at the Canadian box office, which is like kind of unheard of for a Talent to Watch movie. Yet, you know, our distributor's saying that we still owe them money. So it's like, it's just kind of wild.
Everybody was talking about how they were in the conversation.
Noah Segal is just back from the Cannes Film Festival, where the talk was all about Canadian titles. While he's frustrated about the delay of an online streaming act that would force streamers to promote Canadian content.
It's typically Canadian. We move extremely slowly and we're pensive.
Look at this place. 400 years of history.
He points at the success of the movie French Girl, a rom-com set in Quebec City, as a road forward.
The appetite at the streaming level is very high.
Really?
Many streamers are bidding for it.
In a sea of streaming, he says Canadian filmmakers will need to be more commercial. As Chandler Levac begins shooting her second film, she's banking on the younger generation.
They're all on Letterboxd, and they're really engaged with cinematic culture, and they want Canadian movies to be fun and exciting and accessible to them.
What are you filming? Clouds.
Hoping their passion will support hers. Eli Glasser, CBC News, Toronto.
Now let's dig deeper into the stories shaping our world. Great white sharks are moving north in greater numbers than ever before.
The oceans are warming, and that warming water brings with it, more sharks.
But first, after those historic guilty verdicts, will Donald Trump actually go to jail?
We'll keep fighting, we'll fight till the end, and we'll win.
Convicted on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records, the twice impeached former president will be sentenced in July. And we have two experts on the U.S. criminal justice system to speak with us this evening. Jeremy Saland is a criminal defense lawyer and was a Manhattan assistant district attorney. And Shira Shenlin was a federal judge. Shira, let me start with you. How do you think the judge in the Trump case may be feeling about the comments that the president is making very publicly, dismissing all of this as a rigged, biased process?
I think this judge has learned to ignore that. He's heard Trump say those words over and over again for months now. I suppose he's put it aside. He said, this is what he's going to say every night. I know that. I'm not going to let it get to me. So I think he's able to push it aside. That's the best answer I can give.
Well, and that's what judges...
Although today, Trump called him a devil. That was a new one.
Well, so that's the thing. So I get it. The judges need to have a thick skin and just deal with the evidence and the case law. But there must be moments, aren't there, where a judge in their heart is kind of thinking, this is really making me mad, and you have to struggle to be fair in that situation?
Right. You do have to struggle to be fair. It has happened to every judge with a high-profile case. You've been criticized by the defendant or by the press, and you just have to develop the ability to put it aside and do what you think is right. So I think he's doing everything he can not to let it get under his skin.
Now, the big question for both of you, Jeremy, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I would just say as important it is not to offend the judge. I'm confident, as we just heard moments ago, that the judge is putting it aside. My bigger fear is the impact on the American people that will believe the rhetoric and the lies and the misinformation that he's sharing and selling about how he's been prevented to defend himself, how he couldn't testify, how the law is against him. He's been afforded the same rights as everyone else, and arguably more so because of any defendant I have ever had as a client, and any person that I prosecuted as a prosecutor behaved as he did and has, he likely would be, or she likely would be, sitting behind bars a long time ago.
Yeah, but Jeremy, the problem is, I don't have to tell you this, in the United States you have, two large groups of Americans last night who watched different cable news channels and saw completely different analyses of what happened in that court. And some of them got a constant message telling them that this was a corrupt process. As someone who's devoted their life to the law, you must find that frustrating.
Frustrating would be an understatement. I find it really reprehensible. It really brings a visceral response to me. It gets me angry because there's certain foundations we really take pride in our country, and I'm sure you do in Canada and anywhere, any country that believes in law and order. It doesn't matter where it is, any state that believes in law and order, any person, that there's certain things you do and you don't do. And again, no matter what the spin is, no matter what he says, no matter who imbibes upon it, it is not true. He got a fair trial. We can agree to disagree about certain political background, but this is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. He was innocent until if and when proven guilty, which he was. There was due process. His attorneys filed all sorts of motions. He had a right to testify and decided not to. The gag order was very limited. So, it's just simply not true.
So I want to jump in here too. I do want to jump in and comment on what I just heard. Of course, I agree that there will be many listeners to Mr. Trump's ranting and raving who will believe him. But there's no way to stop that, Jeremy. He has the right to speak, as crazy as he may be, as crazy as he may sound. That's one of our values also. He has the right to speak, and he can say all these terrible things, and most of us will not believe it for a minute. But you're right. His base will believe every word of it. It's hopefully the swing voters who won't. But I don't agree with you that somehow because he said all that he should be in the slammer. I can't agree with that. There was a limited gag order, as you said. He eventually obeyed it after 10 findings of contempt, and nobody found him in contempt after that for saying corrupt, the judge is corrupt, the system's corrupt. He's going to do that. And we lived with this guy for 4 years as president, and he said lots of crazy things like we should drink Clorox. Well, we couldn't stop him, but we knew we shouldn't drink Clorox.
All right, let me jump in and get to, the big thing that's coming next, which is the sentencing. So I'm going to ask both of you this question, and Shira, I'm going to start with you. What you know, based on what you know about the offenses that he was convicted of and the law here, what do you think is likely going to happen here in terms of sentencing?
Okay, so you're asking us to speculate and predict. So my speculation and prediction is he will get a short prison term followed by probation, what we call a split sentence. I think he will want to put him in prison for a short amount of time to say nobody's above the law and everybody's treated equally. So I would think at most it would be 3 to 6 months in custody and a remainder of time probation, where you have to report to your probation officer every week, which is humiliating. Maybe not. Maybe he would do all probation and no jail for the usual reasons. First offender, older man. Those are the usual reasons, not a risk of repeating, in my opinion, not a risk of flight. Okay, all those things. But I think he will give him a short prison term. That said, I want you to understand that Trump will make bail pending appeal, and he's not going to be remanded from the sentence into a jail cell.
Okay, I'm surprised that you think he may get jail time, and I hope we have time to come back. We're down to the last 2 minutes. But Jeremy, what do you think is likely in terms of a sentence?
I think there's no incarceration, whether it's jail or prison. And in fact, I just think probation, as much as I don't want to disagree with the judge sitting or not, I think probation is very difficult for someone who is a former president or a potential future president, traveling, getting checked in upon, having permission to leave the state, having to transfer potentially to Florida. So I think what's called a conditional discharge, community service, a fine, which will be nominal. I think at the end of the day, you have to hang your proverbial hat on the fact that he will have a felony, and that will have to be justice, because that is worse than a scarlet letter in perpetuity. It just simply doesn't go away. So that's what I think the outcome will be.
So,
Shira, Jeremy, I think Jeremy might be right, and I'd like to agree with him. It's possible. We just don't know. But either way, it's going to be bail pending appeal. He's not going to be on probation either. So there you are.
But Shira, I too don't want to disagree with the judge, but I have to say, I'm really surprised that you think that President Trump might get jail time. The things that you talked about, first-time offender at this point anyway, relatively minor crimes, not crimes of violence, for example. And I mean, at some point, presumably, the fact that he was a president and might again be a president, surely that's got to factor into this.
If I have 30 seconds.
Yeah, 30 seconds. Go ahead. Absolutely.
Okay, for rebuttal. He will not express remorse. He's called this judge a devil, and he's called the system corrupt. And the fraud was the fraud on the American people in affecting that election. That's a very serious crime. And there are statistics from your old office that many people who commit this crime do spend time in jail or prison. So he doesn't want to treat him any differently. He may do it to show he's treating him the same way.
And
we'll
Jeremy,
see.
Last word to you, 30 seconds as well. Do you think there's any chance at all that President Trump might go to jail for these offenses?
Well, I actually, in theory, we're both in agreement. The magnitude of this crime, this is not falsifying business records to steal $100,000, and it's a first offender, yes, but it's to steal something far greater than any dollar can ever evaluate or come up to. So I think it warrants prison, but sometimes just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I think this is a situation where, for the sake of the nation, building ourselves back up and moving forward as a country, I don't think that's the right answer.
I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I think the Canadian audience will really benefit from hearing your expertise. Shira and Jeremy, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, a warming ocean is bringing sharks to unexpected places. But tourists are flocking to get closer. We'll show you how that's possible next. More great white sharks seem to be lurking off Nova Scotia these days, and they're finding plenty of their favorite prey, seals.
When the waters historically were too cold for sharks, that was a food source that wasn't accessible. And now it's almost like, the buffet's been opened.
They may help balance the ecosystem and boost ecotourism. Tom Murphy breaks down why they're here and why there's still so much to learn about them.
They intrigue us.
Like a beautiful monster.
And frankly, they scare us. Great white sharks are on the move in Canadian waters in what appears to be greater numbers.
Shut off that engine.
So are eco-tourists keen to spot them.
They're coming so close right now.
But don't forget, this is not Hollywood.
That's a 20-footer. 25.
This is Halifax. And for all we think the movies have taught us about white sharks, there are people here learning we really don't know much about them at all. For instance, why? Why are so many white sharks coming here to the coast of Nova Scotia?
I'm more nervous than excited.
This is Neil Hammerschlag. He's a marine ecologist with a PhD and a theory.
The oceans are warming at a rate like 99% faster than the rest of the global oceans. And that warming water brings with it, more sharks, because most sharks are cold-blooded. And essentially, they rely on warm water to heat up their body and to help with their metabolism and regulating their body. So if it's too cold, they can't get here.
Conservation efforts in the United States might also be helping, but Hammerschlag says the fact is no one really knows for sure.
The great white shark is probably the most mysterious, misunderstood, and charismatic animal on the planet.
Hammerschlag owns and operates what he calls Canada's only shark dive cage. Last year, 750 people came to catch a glimpse of the endangered species.
Last year, through our photos, we identified 36 different great white sharks.
36, that's considered a lot. So more sharks and more eco-tourists too. It was a little overwhelming for Hammerschlag's little boat.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So maybe this part is a little bit like Hollywood?
This year we've got a bigger boat.
This is Hammerschlag's bigger boat, faster too, to get 3 nautical miles offshore more quickly to search for white sharks. He's upgrading the dive cage as well in anticipation of even more gawkers this year. So those white sharks, the stars of the show, had better be ready for their close-up this year. But Hammerschlag says this is about more than gawking. He calls his tourists citizen scientists, helping him document the white shark population and fund his research.
Since they're going to be in the water, in the cage, will help us try to get an estimate of the number of sharks that are there, relative size, the sex of the sharks, which are going to teach them how to determine that. But also just their photographs are going to be pretty key. We're going to use people's photographs to try to piece together a database on the different individuals. That's because each shark has unique body markings, which we can actually take that information and link it to individuals. People don't protect things they don't love. And we're hoping that it will instill this appreciation for great white sharks because, you know, these are animals and that do need protection.
So white sharks are here and in some pretty big numbers, but how excited or concerned should we humans be about the apex predator of the ocean hanging off our coast?
Fortunately for us, you know, humans are not on the natural menu for great white sharks. If that were the case, we could never ever go swimming or surfing. There'd be nothing easier than for these sharks to pick us off like you would see in the movies. But that are the movies. That's not what reality is. Reality is sharks want to avoid people.
Yeah, but the critics say humans aren't on the natural menu for bears either. Ask a surfer.
As they say, don't feed the bears. You know, it's if you don't want to have problems with them, you don't feed them.
I can go slow ahead. Come on down and chum some of this shit.
We're not out there just pumping what you might see in the movies in Jaws, like blood and guts into the water. We're using a relatively small amount of intact bait that we put in the water. We can't create a shark spot. We have to go to where the sharks already are. And we're putting, natural smells into the environment, which they're already looking for. And these sharks are moving up and down the coastline, and we're simply trying to get their attention momentarily without feeding them, to try to study them, to try to create this appreciation for them.
There are some people who think maybe it's time to start warning people there are white sharks here, like signs on beaches.
Let me say again. I've seen, I have advocated for the need to have signs informing people that there are sharks here, and also, help making sure that we are prepared in the event of potential rare shark bite. I don't think it's scaring people. I think it's just being shark smart.
And I have one more question about the white shark. Could these sharks actually help cull the overpopulation of the more than 350,000 gray seals here, whose voracious appetites also include the fish that we eat?
There's a huge upside to this ecologically. The thing is, sharks control seal populations. When the waters historically were too cold for sharks, that was a food source that wasn't accessible. And now it's almost like, the buffet's been opened.
So there's that. And yet there are still so many unanswered questions, waiting for the mysterious white shark to give up its secrets.
As Tom mentioned, while there's seemingly a rise in numbers, great white sharks remain endangered. That makes it illegal to kill or capture them. After almost a half-century of laughs, Yuck Yuck's founder, Mark Breslin, talks about the impact of his national stand-up comedy chain and the role of humor in society.
Sick humor is what you need for a sick society, for a sick culture. And I do believe that the culture we live in is kind of sick, and the only response to it is to own that sickness.
And so what if the comedy seemed to be hateful or like made fun of people who were sitting here and made them uncomfortable?
You're talking about my act now. The audience does not come here to hate. The audience comes here to laugh. So, the audience has the ability to censor the acts by either not laughing or laughing. And if they're laughing, it's probably within the realm of acceptability.
You can watch my full conversation with comedian Mark Breslin this Sunday. We explore his passion for stand-up and what he believes defines the great comics. Next, a family gets an unexpected pet.
Right off the bat, we grab our phone, try to look it up. Is there such a thing as a pink grasshopper?
The colorful critter in our moment. A family in London, Ontario was surprised to spot this rare grasshopper, unusually bright pink, just sitting on their driveway. So they did what any family would do. They gave it a home and called it Bubbles. The new family pet makes our moment.
We're walking across our driveway, and I saw in the corner of my eye this pink thing jump. This kind of threw me off a little bit. So we immediately all dropped down to our knees, all of us to go look. I'm like, there it is.
We found the grasshopper right in this spot.
Right off the bat, we grab our phone, try to look it up. Is there such a thing as a pink grasshopper?
You can see the pink grasshopper right there.
We have a little insect viewer and catcher, so we put in there just so we could look at it while we researched and kind of figured out what exactly we had there.
Look at him.
You want to talk about how you came up with the name?
I just like the name Bubbles.
Because it was pink like bubblegum. We've been going out and cutting fresh grass and leaves for it every day, learning how to care for a grasshopper, just something I didn't think we'd ever do.
I found this the legend and not true.
Jack, what did we think that finding the pink grasshopper was kind of like finding?
It was kind of like finding rare Pokemon cards.
Like a shiny Pokemon, ones that are a different color than all the rest.
1%. Apparently that is your chance and my chance of seeing a pink grasshopper in our lifetime out in the wild. Why is that, you might ask? Well, first of all, it's apparently a recessive gene that leads to the pink color, so very rare. And the pink grasshoppers just don't fare very well in your average, green foliage. So when they are hopping about, they're easy for predators to pick off. Thank you for being with us. Join me Sunday, I hope, for Cross Country Checkup on CBC Radio and CBC News Network, and later that night, back here for The National. I'm Ian Hannah-Mansing in Vancouver. Have a great Saturday.